Building a good Yu-Gi-Oh deck isn't necessarily hard, but it can be expensive. So that being said, these are the 5 best budget decks for the July 2023 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. Let's jump into it. What's up, Ocean? You got Matt here, and welcome to a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video. Today we are talking about budget decks and why they're going to be so good in the July 2023 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. Right now in the room, there are 4 of the top decks. The tier 1 decks are going to be Kashtira, Sprites, Labyrinth, and Branded. And each of those decks is pretty expensive in their own right. You look at a deck like Kashtira, Fenrirs are still pretty pricey. Sprite Blues are also very expensive. You have the Lady Labyrinth, which is like a $30 card right now. And then of course, Branded and all of its expensive cards, the Quests, the Cartesias, everything like that. And of course, you have to go max rarity, full power Branded. That is the only way to play the deck, right? Anyways, these 5 decks I'm going to talk to you about today are all ranging between the $75 to $100 price range for the main and extra deck. There's obviously room to grow. We're gonna have to make some concessions somewhere, so it might be not the most ideal way to play, whether you're lacking some consistency or a very powerful boss. The entire deck is still very playable at just at about $100, and it gives you room to grow, which I think is super important as you learn the deck more and more, and it's a great way to start off your Yu-Gi-Oh journey. So with that being said, make sure to smash the like button, because at 60 likes, I'll be bringing you an amazing deck profile for one of the 5 decks on this list. And of course, guys, comment your thoughts on the video down below and which budget deck is your favorite in the meta today. And of course, if you have not subscribed already, make sure to do so, because only 5% of my viewers are subscribed to the channel. So if you guys want to help us reach our end of year goal of 1,000 subscribers, then make sure to hit that subscribe button. And now, without further ado, here are the top 5 best budget decks for the July 2023 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. Let's jump into it. Starting off this list at number 5 is going to be Sky Striker. This is an amazing fan favorite archetype that is getting nearer and nearer to full strength. We just got Engage back to 2, which is incredible because Engage is not once per turn. You can loop that thing pretty easily with Kagari, and because you have 2 copies in your deck, you can now go Engage into Engage again and get 3 searches and 3 draws on your turn, which is insane. We're in a very heavy board breaking format right now as well, and this deck has like 1 monster on the field. A lot of its resources are kept in its hand, so I don't feel too worried about dealing with board breakers right now with Striker. The deck has a lot of good things going for it, going first and going second, because its engine is pretty small. There's only about 20 to 25 cards you need to have in the deck, and the rest is just going to be non-engine flex spots, whether it's going to be board breakers or hand traps. You have a lot of variety for options you can play, and cards you can use defensively and offensively that are good spell cards to just pile up on your graveyard. Think of cards like Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse. There's a ton of room to grow this deck as well, because there's a lot of maneuvers that you can make that you're not going to really know before you play the deck. The more you play the deck, the better you're going to get at it, which is going to make it even more worthwhile. And on top of that, the main issue with the deck in terms of a monetary perspective is going to be Turbo Tactics Thrust. It's like a $70 card, and you can't really fit that in your budget because you need at least 1. So I feel like if you eventually want to get to that point, you definitely can. The deck's going to be good for a long time in my mind, because it's just getting back to full power now, and it's going to be good forever because it just does a lot of really fair and balanced things that it can keep up with a lot in the current metagame. Unfortunately, there are some cons with the strategy, and that's going to be number 1, the deck has a lower ceiling than a lot of the decks in the current meta. On top of that, we're in a very heavy anti-spell fragrance reliant format. That card is seeing play in pretty much every single side deck, so having anti-spell fragrance against the deck that is only spell cards, 30 to 35 spell cards, is pretty rough. It's also an older deck, meaning you can have a hard time against some of the newer strategies, and of course you need to have a lot of practice and experience to get really good at the Striker matchup, because the grind game is what's most important, and you have to have experience to get good at that grind game. But that being said, it's still a very solid deck for how old it is. It was made in 2019? It's still a very strong deck, and for less than $100, you're getting a fantastic option in Sky Striker. Moving on to number 4, we have Adventure Plunder Patrol, specifically the going second variant of this deck. This deck is crazy, and you might be saying, Adventure, that's an expensive, non-budget archetype, isn't it? Not really. Thanks to the new Battles of Legends set, the entire archetype is pretty cheap now. If you look at it, the Rite of Aramesir are like $15 each, Fateful Adventure, which you need 1 of, is $10, and then you have the Water Enchantresses, which are $4. That's $67, and that's like your entire budget. And you might be saying, well, we have $100, Matt, what's going on? Well, Plunder is like $15 for everything. It's crazy how cheap this deck is. The entire extra deck you need for this deck is made up of 11 cards, being your 3 Blackbeard and then 2 of each of your ships, and then you have 4 other cards to play. Toad is super cheap, Bahamut Shark is cheap. There's a lot of really inexpensive cards, and you can definitely get this entire deck under $100. You can also play a lot of different variants. I prefer the going second variant of the deck with a lot of board breakers and kaijus, but you can also play a very hand trap reliant deck first, and a lot of cards like Book of Moon, which are really strong in the current format. On top of that, getting to Totally Awesome is pretty easy to do, and the deck also has an in-archetype way to help deal with decks like Kashtira because you can give your opponent a token, and that will also help out with cards like Evenly Matched, being able to keep 2 cards instead of 1, which can be the make or break in an entire duel. The problem is it's very reliant on what your opponent's playing because you have to have the right attributes on their field or graveyard to get the right ships out at the right time. The extra deck is very tight. I mentioned 11 cards already, 3 Blackbeard, 2 of each of the ships. That's a lot of space being taken up, so not a lot of room for tech cards, which can be a little annoying. And then finally, it's a complicated deck because there's a lot of intricacies on when to know to draw cards, discard cards, use certain effects, and get the most amount of value out of it. So you really want to have a lot of experience and practice when playing with Plunder Patrol in general. The Adventure Engine is pretty straightforward, but Plunder is more complicated than that. At number 3 is going to be Floowandereeze, and I'll be honest, I feel like this deck is never really going to die, and that really sucks because I hate this deck. Either way, it is still a very strong deck in the current format. It is extremely cheap because you don't really need an extra deck at all outside of like for extravagances. It's got great draw power through Extravagance and Pot of Duality, and if you can afford it, Pot of Prosperity. You have a way to win in time because of the advent of Adventure giving you 500 life points, and you also have one of the best cards in the deck being Harpy's Featherstorm. This card is insane. It shuts down all monster effects your opponent will activate during the turn. It is crazy. Really powerful card that people just don't talk about enough, I find. Also, M-Pen is one of the best boss monsters in the main deck in the history of the game. I think, in my opinion, the only one that's actually better than it is Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, and that's saying something because I love that card. But on top of that, it has access to Floowandereeze and the Unexplored Winds, which allows you to tribute your opponent's cards, not monsters, cards to summon your cards. That's insane. You can tribute over a field spell or a trap card and just summon out an M-Pen and then just win the game. It is that powerful. It is so hard to respond to and deal with unless you're just going to go for like a Cosmic Cyclone on the Unexplored Winds because it doesn't even activate. What an amazing card to have access to. And on top of that, the deck plays some really powerful tech choices that can be used offensively and defensively, like Book of Moon and Dimension Shifter. These are 2 of the best decks for that. You need to dodge an Imperm, Book of Moon. You need to be able to Book of Moon your opponent's Kashtira Arise Heart, you Book of Moon it there. You can use Dimension Shifter to deal with all the combo decks. You can use Dimension Shifter to be able to banish your own Plunder cards, which is a good thing for them. There is so much value in this deck. There are some problems with it. Imperm, Droll, Valor can all kind of just shut down the turn pretty easily. If you go Droll when your opponent is searching for Eglin, they can't search for M-Pen after that, which makes things really challenging. If they go for Imperm on your Rabina, it is almost going to be the end of the turn and very likely could just be GG, so keep that in mind. If you stop a Floo player from getting to M-Pen or from tributing monsters, then you can kind of win the game pretty easily, and that's what's really important because the deck is super linear. You know exactly what they're going to do and what their game plan is. If you can stop that, you're in a good position. If you're the player, you have to find ways around that, and that's where powerful quick plays come into play. As far as upgrading the deck, the only way to really upgrade this deck is going to be with Pot of Prosperity, which is pretty expensive but not too pricey anymore. I would say that if you can afford it, go for it because the deck is good and the deck could use the Pot of Prosperity, but it's not mandatory for sure. On to number 2 is going to be the deck that I have the least amount of experience on this list, and that's going to be Rikka Sunavalon. Every single time I do a budget tier list, you guys just say, hey, where's Rikka Sunavalon? Where's Rikka? Where's Rikka? Here it is, finally. I'm not disrespecting the deck at all. The deck is very good. It is an amazing combo deck, 1-card combos for days of the deck, and it can put up some really formidable boards. Think of kind of like a lower power Dragon Link. That's what this deck pretty much is. It's a very budget deck, but it's also a very rare deck to encounter. It's a very not sexy deck, let's put it that way. A lot of people, if they're going to play combos, they're going to play Dragon Link instead. So they don't want to have to play plants. It's very common overseas, but not in Canada and the US. Either way, the deck has a lot of good things going for it. People don't really know what to expect, so they misplay around it quite a lot. There's a card like Rikka Con, which allows you to tribute your opponent's monsters to be able to activate your effects for cost, which is huge, so they can't really respond to it. That's incredible. And on top of that, the end board has a lot of interruptions. Not really negates, but more so just spins, destruction, something like that. Not negates, but it's still good and fearsome nonetheless. There's also room for growth because of the Therion package. Adding that in is great, but Regulus is pretty damn expensive right now, so keep that in mind. Either way, there does happen to be some big problems with the deck. Hand traps are really problematic. Early Droll and Lockport can reduce the end board of the deck significantly. Imperm on the Aromaseraphy Jasmine is a really big deal, so keep that in mind when going that. That's a really big choke point for the deck. Dimension Shifter is a pain. Floo against this deck has a pretty easy time because of that reason. And then of course, Rikka Con, if your opponent knows that's the main problem card, they're just going to go for back removal on it to stop you from just tributing over their monsters, which can be kind of bad because, well, number one, it's not the end of the world because you're still getting advantage, but you're forced to actually give up something to get that advantage now, which obviously is a little annoying. And then finally, it is a slightly worse Dragon Link. Just keep that in mind. It's cheaper, but slightly worse, in my opinion. Moving on though to our number 1 deck. What is it going to be? Let's go ahead and find out. Before we jump into our number 1 deck, I want to give a quick shout out to Xeno Dinosaur as my honorable mention. This deck is super strong. The only really expensive card in the deck is going to be Ground Xeno. You don't need 3 copies. There's Barone to play as well if you want to go that route, but you don't have to play the Xeno version if you don't want to. But Dinosaur in general is a fantastic deck to have in this format as well, and super cheap. The entire main deck core is like $5, $10 tops. It's super cheap. Moving on though to our number 1, what is it going to be? If you haven't guessed it, it is Gold Pride Punk. This deck is fantastic. I love the way this deck interacts with the current metagame. I love the way it's going to be getting future support as well, which is nice. The deck has so many extenders because each deck that each portion of the deck, the Gold Pride portion and the Punk portion, they support each other so well and extend for each other, which is great. You can go with your 2 level 3s again to Chariot Carry to get you access to your Gold Pride Better Luck next time, to be able to get you a monster and then use it to summon out because you're taking life points as well. It is so nice to be able to get them to merge together like that into one cohesive strategy. The deck can play through Evenly Matched and Dark Ruler No More as well because it has really powerful in-archetype trap cards to be able to use on your opponent's turn to be able to get you to more monsters to then interrupt your opponent even more, which is obviously very powerful. It's a simple yet effective end board, a lot of main deck monsters, not too many extra deck monsters at the end board, but it can get into them pretty easily, has a lot of really awesome ways to remove opponent's cards with cards like Rollerballer to be able to just equip them non-targeting, and then you can send them to the graveyard when Rollerballer leaves the field, which is obviously incredible. So you can get around cards that can't be sent to the graveyard or destroyed or banished or whatever with Rollerballer, which is awesome. You have an in-archetype way to search for Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, which is nice to have for follow-up if we're dealing with field spells or opposing cards that are quick continuous spells like Birth or whatever it might be. Really solid there. And of course, Nitro Head kind of shuts down decks like Kashtira and cards like Evenly Matched because you're giving your opponent a token, which is obviously very powerful. And now for some cons. The deck plays very little non-engine because there's so much engine being taken up. Maybe you have 9 to 12 spots for non-engine, which is really not much in the grand scheme of things today. On top of that, it's tough to play in time because you're always taking damage from the Punk effects and from Better Luck Next Time and all these things. You want to make sure that you have access to high enough life points in time, and that's not really what you can do with this strategy. It's also a deck that pretty much every single hand trap can beat at the right time. Droll is kind of a worst case scenario for the deck. Going for Ghost Ogre on the continuous spell sucks. Imperm on the Chariot Carry, it hurts. There's a lot of different problems for the deck. And then finally, based on a budget of $100, I'd say this deck is the most close to going over the budget because you kind of have to sacrifice either Psychic and Punisher, which is like a $30 card, or Consistency from Better Luck Next Time, because those are the 2 cards that are pretty expensive. A playset of Better Luck Next Time and a card like Psychic and Punisher can get you close to your budget, which is a little unfortunate. So I think that right now, Psychic and Punisher is a card you want to build towards with this deck. And then you can get the best of the best budget deck once you have like $150, let's say. But $100, you're definitely getting a really strong Gold Pride Punk deck with this current metagame. And that is it, the top 5 best budget decks for the July 2023 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. If you guys enjoyed the video, then do me a favor and smash the like button, because at 60 likes, I'll be bringing you an amazing Adventure Plunder Patrol deck profile that is going to be 100% budget, under $100. So if you're excited for that, smash the like button. Of course, comment down below what is your favorite budget deck. Let me know what decks you're playing in this new format. And finally, guys, subscribe to the channel as well. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and we can't get there without your help. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.